Well, I know that is a negative, but let me give you a positive, that in the last 9 months, we've taken in 357 members, and in the 12 months before that, 585 members, so that over the last year and a half, we've taken in over 800 new members. So we are not a shriveling, dying group. It's the fact that we've got more to do than we have money to do it. But I want us to have it against the backdrop that we have a growing membership that is in a high level of interest.
What were our losses during the same period?
I would guess the renewals usually run about out of 100, maybe 20 renewals are not renewed.
Mm-hmm. So that's 400 out of 2,000?
You're a faster math person than I am, but I'm just quoting what we got from the membership computer.
Now, from Washington State, NaCCRA gets $10 per member dues.
Yeah,
And everybody else in the United States pays $20
that's right.
for individual memberships.
Anyway, forgive me for interrupting, but I just want to say, there's a dynamic going on that is beyond the numbers on a financial report.
Well, to summarize, earlier this year, I sent out a paper to many of you. I think almost everyone that's here got it, not quite everyone, with my thoughts on the future of NaCCRA. They included looking at a variety of different tasks in terms of both membership and advocacy issues, and it recommended setting up committees in charge of these. It recommended some priorities for them, which ones were more important than others, and suggested that we needed to have a much more active board than we've had in the past. My good friend Jack Cumming had a different point of view. He felt that given the situation, NaCCRA should pull back, and I would be glad to have him describe what he feels that is. Essentially, he used the words, I think, relative dormancy, I think was that the word she used, relative dormancy.
Well, I think we want to talk about the substance.
Yeah, but in any case, he felt that we should pull back significantly from where we were this last year. And then there were a number of emails that went back and forth among us. We had comments from several state presidents. There was an email that Jack sent to Michelle Halloran that we passed around, which gave, I thought, an excellent discussion of what our residents are thinking and what some concerns are of NaCCRA for the future. All of those documents are pertinent to the discussion today. And this session is to look at the future of NaCCRA. The proposals that have been suggested run all the way from closing NaCCRA down entirely to getting the board very much more active and pushing as hard as we can with the funds that we have. And I suspect, Jack said that my proposal was a dream, and it probably was because we don't have the funds to do everything I put in that proposal. That's very clear. So the question is open, where should NaCCRA go from here? And where should it put its priorities? What should it do? And I wanted to have an open session.
In view of the concern financially, do you think the board should give consideration to a development committee geared to just raising monies from potential foundations and other individuals?
I'm open to suggestions. I don't want to make any decisions here. I just want to hear ideas and suggestions. Get a general consensus of what your thoughts are. But that's a good suggestion, so I'll put that down. I'm going to be doing a lot of writing, and I'm hoping that you all are going to be doing most of the talking. That's all.
May I ask a question? I'm probably the newest person with the least knowledge. I like to record meetings like this because it just helps me not have to write everything. Can I do that with the consent of the participants?
I guess I've taken that for granted and started,
Oh,
although
you've already got that.
I crashed when I tried to
And your
turn it.
picture will appear.
Oh, and you'll share that in,
Yeah, that'll be shared.
okay, I
Well,
won't bother. I won't bother. Thank you.
well, go ahead, because it always helps to have a
If
backup.
you need
but
ready reference to
it's-
it.
Yeah.
Jack, there are a couple of people here that did not receive all of this material, so I thought I'd ask if you would express your views.
Well, sure. There's some history here. It's hard to know where to begin. My involvement with NaCCRA began really in 2011, or really earlier than that, with Jack Matheson. But then we had a meeting in Charlie Polk. Charlie Polk, for those of you who don't know it, was really after Milt Brummer. Milt Brummer was an early leader of NaCCRA. Charlie Polk was the one who brought NaCCRA to life, and a very astute person. And he's still with us, but he has health challenges that preclude his really participating now. So Ruth and Marlene and Julia Hicks, I think, and I went to Florida in January 2011
Yes.
to meet with Charlie to try to scope out a future for NaCCRA, because NaCCRA was going through a transition, and we wanted it to be an effective organization. And some of this material is documented on the website. Many of the ideas that are here today, we need to have a more active board. We need to have committees with willing volunteers. We need competent people who understand the industry's issues. We ought to have fundraising. All of those issues were discussed in that January 2011 meeting with Charlie Polk. And here we are now, I guess, 5+ years later, and we still have the same, I forgot, we were also supposed to tell people why they should join NaCCRA, give them a list of reasons why they should join NaCCRA. And during Jack's tenure, we had a list which he gave out today of 12 reasons. And later we had a list, which I saw here somewhere, here at NaCCRA in under 2 minutes, why you should join NaCCRA. So this has been going on for a very long time. Now, the main thing that we did in that January 2011 meeting was to decide to retain Bennett Napier. And the main reason for doing that, Bennett Napier is the administrator for an organization called Partners in Association Management. And he got out of, a little of his personal story is relevant to NaCCRA. When he got out of college, I don't know whether he was a political science man or what, but he worked in a congressional office in Washington for a year. And then he went back to Tallahassee to pursue a career locally in Florida. And one of his early clients was the Florida Continuing Care Residents Association, which at the time had 700 members. And so Bennett came up with the concept of chapter memberships, where you'd have a sales focus in each chapter to sell FLYCRA memberships. And he drove the state to build FLYCRA's membership. And if you paid your dues to FLYCRA, once your chapter got up to a certain gravitas, a certain number of members, you could get money back to help with chapter costs. So you didn't have to collect chapter dues. You could, but you didn't have to, in addition to the FLYCRA dues. So he used that to build FLYCRA's membership over a 5-year period from 700 members to 13,000 members, and which is roughly half of the CCRC residents in the state of Florida. And I should add, I left out something. What Bennett said to Milt was, well, I'm starting out, I'm a young fellow, but I'd like to have a family. If I'm going to grow, I've got to grow my little business so I can afford to live on what you guys are able to pay me. So that was the incentive for building it. So we hope that he would help us to grow NaCCRA in a similar way. And so we retained Bennett, and we started having him do the membership accounting, which had previously been done by a fellow whose name escapes me now. I'm having a senior moment.
That's all right.
Yeah,
It'll come back to me too.
yeah, Ruth's having trouble too, but anyway, we had a young fella. Bennett charged about twice the price for the membership accounting, but we were getting this whole setup, and we were hoping that that would help us to grow NaCCRA. And I think Bennett is a Southerner, and he's very deferential, Southern hospitality, all of that, so he's very deferential to the leadership, and so that just has not occurred. Most of the membership growth came when Bob Nicholson persuaded the people in the state of Washington that they should be NaCCRA members first and state members second. So that's been our major growth thing. It didn't come through Bennett's organization, but we still have been, we were paying Bennett $2,000 a month. And I believe at the July meeting, I wasn't part of that, but I believe that he's since agreed to take less, to do less. So now he principally does the membership accounting for roughly $1,000 a month. And that becomes a question, one of the questions here, because the main places where we spend money are on the cost to have this meeting. The board members who come to this meeting have their expenses paid if they want. Not everybody puts in for it, but that's been a big expense. We also pay this cost for accounting. Well, a lot of that now you can do on an automated basis using software. PHP MySQL is pretty, what's usually used for that. And you can automate the billing and collection. So there's a lot that can be done to reduce costs in that area. And the other area is the lifeline. The printing and mailing of the lifeline is very expensive. Well, with email distribution, and increasingly people even in this age demographic either have email themselves directly or they know somebody who has email. So if we were to distribute the lifeline electronically and do it perhaps more frequently and more cogently, there are some things we could do. So the question was, should we have, NaCCRA has reserves, I think it's about $40,000, some of which are restricted funds, some of which are earmarked for different purposes. We could just burn through that money, and when it's gone, then the money's gone, because we've just been burning. And I think increasingly, because there are fewer and fewer directors, so the travel cost is going down. The lifeline, we changed the frequency of publication, so the cost is principally this administrative cost. So the question was, what kind of an organization, what is it that we want NaCCRA to be? The result of all of this has been And so I think first, the core question is there now going to be a surge in membership or access to other funding sources that is going to make it possible to continue spending as we have and preclude our having to change and manage our costs?
Could I just add
And
one?
our-
Yes. What we have tried to do, because we do not have money for everybody to get together, we have been having monthly board of directors meetings by teleconference. And that has worked out very well, so that all the members of the board and officers have met and made some good decisions en route. But, so that's been one way, and Bennett has helped us to accomplish that. Sorry to interrupt, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, Bennett has a local firm in Tallahassee that does communication services, so he's put us into that. He has a local letter house in Tallahassee, so that handles the lifeline. He has local banking connections in Tallahassee, so our bank accounts have been moved into that context. So that you're absolutely right that Bennett's put all those pieces together.
Yeah, Jack, the other footnote is that with the quarterly lifeline, we have already had 2 email blasts that went to all the members, acknowledging that there's probably 82% have email and another 12 don't, but so that there's current news going out for the first time in a timely manner rather than having a board action, having to wait 60 or 80 days before the membership knows what the board did.
Well, you bring up another challenge. The other challenge we've had is recruiting people who are capable to chair committees, to do hard work. We've typically made the entry point for volunteer service in NaCCRA to be the board. Come on our board if you're willing. And some of the people come on the board and they're already superannuated when they arrive, you know, and so that makes for interesting board meetings. But you know, that's a challenge. So how do you manage an organization of an aging population and have the leadership you want? Well, the best way is to find who the informal leaders are. They're not going to come forward to volunteer because they're busy being leaders. They're the natural leaders in the organization. And the electronics does allow you to sort of flip the organization on its head so that instead of having it run centrally by a president and a board, they would still be important and still provide leadership, but you can open it more to have the general membership be involved when they want to be involved. Now, they're not going to be involved all the time because they're just not interested. But by golly, when there's an issue that gets them excited, they'll be there. And it would be nice to have NaCCRA be there in readiness for them when they get excited about something. And what has happened in the past is that the NaCCRA leadership has a point of view. When those issues arise, for example, we heard the discussion today about the name of CCRCs. When those, and the one that Dan got involved with was whether we should, how we should be working with Leading Edge. When those issues arise, the leadership sort of decides them, and then that leads to divisiveness within the organization. And we don't have a natural way to have that flow naturally into the organization's decision processes. So I see that as a problem. Our main mission should be to advocate for residents. And it's only natural for residents who've invested in these contracts to believe that they made a wise investment. They want to trust their providers. They're hoping it all works out. And so there are issues that are not always, that are things that should be of concern to residents that aren't always popular with residents. For example, particularly surrounding the use of entry fees. I think entry fees were to go away, many of the issues in this industry would go away with them, because for those of us who have a non-refundable contract, we're locked in by our entry fee. I paid $550,000 to live in my apartment, and I lose $550,000 if I move out. And so that becomes a major deterrent. Most people don't understand that there's no regulation of how those entry fee monies are run. So I was explaining to Basil this morning that, Brookdale got into the entry fee business principally because it generates a large amount of what accountants call cash flow from operations, or free cash. They refer to it as free cash. And so the entry fees are viewed as free cash. The people who pay the entry fees view it as their life savings paid to ensure their lifetime security. They don't know that they're not getting that promise is not being fulfilled. So that's a subtle thing that we need to educate them on and advocate for, that most residents may not even be aware that they need, and so they're not really supported. They say, why are you making all this trouble? Because Leading Age pushes back and says that that we're making trouble. We reached out, we wanted to work with the providers, and that has proven to be challenging. So we've had a number of challenges. One was they agreed to form a joint task force. Joint task force met once. We said, well, gee, for your convenience, why don't we meet during your meeting in Indianapolis? They wrote back, we're too busy to meet with you. They're too busy to meet with residents. We submitted, they have something like, 465 people participating in panels. None of them were residents, but as soon as we pointed that out, the word got to them, it must have gotten to them, because they immediately approached Joan, and they're adding some residents at the very last minute. But they require that you put in proposals for panels at these meetings a year in advance. We put in one last year, which was marshaling grassroots support for advocacy positions, a balanced panel of providers and residents, and were turned down. Now, why would an advocacy organization like Leading Age turn down a proposal to marshal grassroots support for advocacy? The only possible reason is because it was put forward by residents. We found out that, we were encouraged to book our hotel. I don't want to say Leading Age did this intentionally, but I woke up this morning to find out that the hotel I booked through Leading Age, they only booked me for one day. And so fortunately, I had a printout of my reservation, so I wasn't expelled, but they were threatening to put me out on the street this morning. So that relationship, as Dan correctly saw it would be, but I think we had to play it out, Dan, to let them show where they are. Now I think sentiment is beginning to change within the provider community because they're embarrassed by how egregious this appears. But
and just another PS, because several years previous to that, there was a wonderful panel that you were on and we were all, and there was, I can't even remember what city it was in, but it was a very great panel and great attendance, and we got great reviews.
240 providers in workshop 87B at 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning in Denver, and it was the highest evaluated and best attended of any of the 200 workshops.
So
And
we
so-
did. In 2010, in October of 2010, Leading Age met in Los Angeles. And this was, I think, the first time I proposed that we have a resident panel on surveys. because in our CCRC, the survey that the provider does, they're required by law in California to survey the residents. And so they hired a firm called Service Track, which gives you a competitive advantage from their survey. So I won't go into how they accomplished that, but we were so appalled as a group of residents in our CCRC that we did our own survey. And so we suggested that we present the resident perspective as accomplished by this. And so we were turned down by Leading Age California, interestingly. We suggested first we were going to do this for Leading Age California. They turned us down because it came from residents, and they told us that this is a provider association. We don't have outreach for residents. But we did get it approved by Leading Age National, provided we added a provider to our panel. This was in 2010. So we got the president of our company, the president of the owner of our CCRC, to come on the panel with us. And so that's where this started. We had 400 people at that session. It was
the same with ours.
large. So I suspect that it may be that for some providers, this success of having cogent residents putting forward material is troubling. And so I'm guessing that that's where the back pressure comes from. I know that there's considerable controversy within the Leading Age Board. The Leading Age National Board has no residents in its membership, so the resident voice is silent.
And that's why we have our buttons.
And
These are the people that we represent, the residents.
yeah,
Because
but the
if it
money,
weren't
of
for
course,
us, they wouldn't be.
the money comes from the residents, flows through the providers, winds up in the hands of the vendors. You'll find a exhibit hall full
You'll
of them.
see, you'll see.
So if you follow the money, that's the money trail. But anyway, the question came up about encouraging residents to be on boards of directors. They don't, yeah, it's too early to go there. So we have, it's an uphill climb, and it's something that calls for a small group. And the question is, can we do it? Can we galvanize our membership best through a central leadership group with a committee structure, etc.? Or is there another way to better galvanize the membership and do it at lower cost? Do we need to have the kind of administrative operation that we now have, or can we reduce the cost of our administration? And if we do, how can we do that best? Some states have a volunteer who handles that. We don't have anybody stepping forward wanting to pick up a pick and shovel and go to work. So that becomes a challenge. You know, people like to be the leader. They don't like to be the follower. So, and I think it's a fair statement. One of the things I found out in my correspondence with Michelle Holloran, she came back and she said, well, you've got to understand, I don't understand finance. And Roberta Jacobson, who's our president, she says, well, I don't understand these financial things. And if you read the Leading Age just put out a little brochure on the not-for-profit advantage. Because the core value of Leading Age is the not-for-profit difference. They went to the mat in Maryland over this, and they had an organization in Maryland that was a member of Leading Age for years called Lifespan. And they drove them out of the organization because they had too many for-profit members. And they formed a competing Leading Age organization in Maryland, which is headed by Joe Schulman, who's a very capable person, and they're doing capable work. But you get, there's this mindset that it's wrong to pay taxes to support the local community you do business in.
We invited Steve Bagg to speak to one of our Washington State meetings. We had 200 or 300 residents, and he did his usual effective thing about the changing demographics and what people expect, and it was really effective until he got to the point where he said, and the not-for-profit way is the way to go, and if you're not that way, you're not anything. And the 30 people from my community who are a for-profit said, what the hell is this about? and why should we have anything to do with this?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, he could have kept his mouth shut, but he had to reach out and insult the people from Timber Ridge, where your executive Heather came from,
Yeah.
and my place, and 2 other places, and we're trying to build something with residents, and he just dropped this bomb, you know.
You have to remember that Leading Age, when they celebrated their 50th anniversary, they gave a history. And Leading Age was formed by a group of 50 nonprofit organizations that came together across the country. So it wasn't formed, it's something that grew from the bottom up, and it was formed by nonprofit groups. And they've kept it nonprofit through the years. It isn't something that, you know, an organization decided, we're going to form an organization, it's only going to be for nonprofit. It's for nonprofit people who actually put it together and formed it. Why should they change now?
Well, they shouldn't, and the question is, are they the future or are they the past? And I think you've just given us a very good
Accept the present. The present is what it is.
précis on that.
The present is around this table with 3 major parts of NaCCRA that are for-profit. That's the present.
Well, the for-profits are growing more rapidly. Now, there are greedy for-profits. You know, in the business world, there's a developer mentality. You come in, you develop something, you get your money, you get out quick, and you shut down that corporation. So you can't be sued anymore and say bye-bye, and the roof leaks, and too bad, I'm sorry, we did the best we could or something. But, you know, so there's a greed mentality, but most businesses exist to serve customers. Without a customer, you don't have a business. And most businesses pay their fair share of taxes. And the main thing that distinguishes the not-for-profit industry is that they do not contribute taxes to the communities they dwell in. That's their main distinguishing type. They're just as these places are run on fee income. They're not dependent on philanthropy. They use philanthropy to try to reduce their burden, because in order to retain their tax exemption, they're required to keep people in residence if their money runs out. And of course, with fees increasing rapidly, people's money sometimes does run out. And particularly with the move toward the Type C kind of contract. And when they're required to pay that out of general revenues, but if they can, through philanthropy, raise funds, that reduces their general revenue burden. So they all have foundations to raise funds, which is a little disingenuous. So it's a moving target. I think there are industry leaders. John Corcoran of Counterpoint, I don't know whether you're familiar with him, comes to mind, who recognize that the industry, the future is going to be in the tax-paying model. And I think you're going to see a lot of nonprofits begin to convert to for-profit organizations to be able to give better value to their residents, because when you have access to the capital markets, the equity markets, it's possible to provide a better product.
So what you're talking about is what NaCCRA, I mean, we can admit for-profit as well as non-profit as members of NaCCRA. There's nothing ever to prevent that.
Well, we have a lot of for-profit. Bob lives in a for-profit community. Ruth lives in a for-profit. Dick lives in a for-profit. Kate lives in a for-profit.
Half of Connecticut is for-profit, the other half is not.
We have it in NaCCRA, and we had, you know, and there's no reason to question it or to defend it.
And the main difference, the for-profits value money. You know, they look at the money.
We're also the
And
highest
so
taxpayer.
if your goal is to provide value, you have to consider money. You can't say money doesn't matter. Money matters.
Yeah, we don't have to defend that. We've got it.
You can generalize by saying that the retirement centers launched by the Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church were all nonprofit, and there are numerous across the country, as you know.
And we all know that the churches manage their money very well.
Joe Lewis has been trying to get word in it.
The bankruptcy of all the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, CCRC in the USA.
Okay.
Let's get off this religious stuff.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
I am one of them, but I visited Lenore Woods. I sent Jack the book that described the bankruptcy. It was one of 12 owned by the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, so poorly managed it went into toilet. So, I mean, it's not a black and white.
No, the American Baptist Association experienced the same in
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
Joan Lewis.
Anyway, just,
Jack, you mentioned something that I think I'd like to explore further if we can.
Walls, Joan's been trying to get a word
Oh,
in.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
just
Very quickly, going back to Jack's grassroots panel being turned down, it was an excellent idea, and they finally
yeah.
realized that, so they called me or emailed me, so we're actually doing it.
Yeah.
They have me listed as resident political advocacy, and Hank listed as resident community organizer. The very tail end of 2 large panels, but at least
You're there.
we're there.
But they didn't
We
go
are
through,
there.
and they didn't go through NACRA.
No, they looked, quite frankly, they looked to see which residents had organized, and then they could very easily see that we lived in Washington, and they could call up our management to see if we were okay, I suspect.
Yeah, we,
If we would work, yes, and
yeah,
which is valid,
in the joint task force, we had a proposal.
yes.
We wanted them to look at providing the same kinds of, we had a proposal for providing the guarantees for entry fee investments, the same as you have with bank deposits, insurance policies, and pension plans. They rejected that out of hand, that they won't even discuss it with us. And so we were gonna help them to do it. So, I've been reaching out now to the for-profit providers were driven out of Leading Age around 1990 and formed their own organization. I don't know why they haven't lobbied to get the nonprofit exemption lifted, because wouldn't be hard to do, but so we've been reaching out to them, and we may be able to get some advocacy going through other channels. But Leading Age for now seems to be sort of they're the most open to residents nominally on the face of things, but when it comes to matters of real substance, we had a meeting with Steve Mogg on May 18th, 2010. May 18th, 2010, so over 6.5 years ago, where we raised these financial issues, the flawed accounting in particular. And we said, we would like to, and the people who were there were Jack Matheson and Bill Root, who was then heavily involved in finance for NaCCRA and me, and met with Steve Mogg, and we said we would like to have a joint group with financial leaders from the industry to talk these matters through. That never happened. So 3 years later, I asked Steve why that had never happened. He said, well, we have no finance committee in the industry. It's a non-for-profit industry, so there was nobody for you to meet with.
What we're doing is we're looking to Leading Age to reinforce NaCCRA, and that's going down the wrong path. We need to work on enforcing it ourselves. Now, first of all, we need to know who we are, what we are. What's our organizational chart? What we are is an organization made up of state members, community members, and individual members. Now, Washington State changed that. And what they want to do is change the whole United States so that it operates like Washington State. Everybody who's a member of a state organization is also a member of NaCCRA. The original concept was state, community, individual. States that joined were members of the board. And they had, I think that 2 members. They were, so you could have the president or anybody they were designated by the president be a member of the board. Communities had a member of the board. So what we're talking about is these are incoming leaders that we've been ignoring lately, because we want to do away with state memberships, community memberships, and individual memberships, and have one kind of membership which looks like Washington State.
NACCRA was
And
formed.
that's the new bylaws.
I feel it's-
NACCRA, let me just correct a few little in the history. NACCRA was formed by Jim Transo of California, Milt Brummer of Florida, and Bob Sparks of Maryland.
And Harry Groves.
And Harry Groves came in later. It was, the original were the three. And they thought that it would just be, it'd be nice to have a national voice for the association. They thought they could run it on a minimum budget, and that the states would really do all the work. And that when they needed a national thing, they would just invoke the NaCCRA thing. So and Bob Sparks came up with the name, and he formed the corporation. That's why it's a Maryland corporation. And so they only were going to have association memberships. And then they needed more money, so they came up with and each state was allowed to appoint 2 board members. And they thought that the thing would grow. Well, it grew up to about 7 or 8 states, and then it halted.
It was a pretty strong
but
membership in those states. It was a pretty strong
All right,
organization.
he's talking, excuse me.
So if all 50 states had joined, there'd have been 100 board members. And then to get more money, they added community membership. Each community could appoint a board member. And there are 2,000 communities. So you could have had a board with 2,100 members. And that's more than we have members now. So you could run it. You can operate, it's possible, but it takes a little genius to put it together. So, but then along the way, they added individual memberships. With time, the individual members became the ones who were active, and the states just became pretty much dormant, and that continues now. When Walt Boyer hosts a teleconference with the state president, he's lucky if he gets 3 on the call, and that includes Gerard Highland from Oregon, who doesn't really have an association, pretty much speaks for himself. So, that original concept served their purpose at that time, but with time it became clear that there needed to be an evolution.
Yeah, if we get up to 10 or 12 members, we might need to rethink it. But right now, we have 8 or 9 state members. When I was the president of Virginia State, I came to all of the national meetings, but I was not on the board. I wasn't invited to participate on the board.
Were your feelings hurt?
Oh, come on.
I should have been, because the members, the bylaws included me, but the members didn't.
Let's let Dan speak.
Well, from a few of the things that Jack said, where he was pointing out issues that residents are a little bit aware of, or maybe more aware of, and from the list of things in Walt's paper as possible tasks, it seems to me undeniable that there's a need for a nationwide organization of residents. That is the fundamental fact, is that there's a need for this organization. And the primary issue, it seems to me, is that although there's been estimated to be 600,000 residents, CCRC residents in America, we can't reach them. It's hard for us to reach them. That is the nub of the problem. We can't reach these people. Even if only 5% of them could resonate to the mission. Imagine if we had 5% of 600,000 people paying $20 a year. We could then begin to have a staff and do the kinds of things. So while I appreciate the history, and I appreciate that the history was strong, what I'm interested in is whether the invention in Washington is indeed a solution to this abiding problem that after 16 years or 13 years, we haven't been able to reach more than 2,000 of 600,000 people. So that's the thing I think we have to look at very closely. And I guess what we did find is that the dynamic that worked in Florida with Bennett didn't work on a nationwide somehow it can be translated from a state to the nation. And what I'm trying to figure out is whether the Washington experience is the same as the Florida experience with Bob being an unpaid Bennett.
Well, we did, okay, here's what happened with that. When Bennett didn't step up and see membership development as his principal role, he ran a little thing, we paid him to do it didn't really, Pete, I think you were involved, but aside from that, he really didn't do it. So I put together a guide modeled on the Florida guide that was used for membership development in Florida, and shared it with the then treasurer and the then membership vice president, and they didn't really attach on to it. Now, we used it in Ohio, Illinois, and Washington. And in Washington, that model went into effect and operated. In Illinois, when they found out that the NaCCRA board didn't really support the program that was in that guide, they felt they had been misled. We told them it was a draft guide that the board had under, but the board never took it up. And there was no impetus to take it up. So they then, first the Ohio organization folded, and then the Illinois organization folded because it didn't have the support it needed from NaCCRA to be able to thrive. So Illinois and Ohio went away. Washington came in, and once they found out how it was with the other states, felt they'd been suckered. So they are now forming a separate organization, which they now call NaCCRA or something, and it's not clear what they are very supportive of NaCCRA in some way that I don't understand. Now, maybe Bob is more conversant with that, but what's going on in Washington, I don't fully understand, but I believe that Frank Little and Jim McLean, who are core leaders there, believe that they would be better off to collect the dues and then just to decide whether to support NaCCRA or not, the way the other states do.
Could I speak up now?
Yeah, sure.
Finally, watching and listening. We have a very strong state organization. Does everybody agree? Actually, Orange.
You have a great one,
Yes,
yes.
We meet always, twice a year. In April and October, we have plenary meetings. All who want to come, and we have room for them, they will come to our meetings. We had one recently in October, had two great speakers, really great meeting. April was also a good meeting. So we meet on those times. We have executive committee meetings at least 6 other times during the year, and we intend to be strong. It's our goal to be strong, and to be a strong state organization. We do have a few members that are individual members of NaCCRA, but our strength comes from the fact that we're a state organization. And I think other states, it's my humble opinion, that NaCCRA should be a group of state organizations. That's and that's a simple way of putting it. And the state organizations can be whatever they want, but every state has different laws and works differently. So to try to make them all the same is probably not reasonable, but we have self-interest. Orange grew out of the self-interest of the residents. We wanted to make it possible to compare, each other. So we do a lot of survey kind of work, and we're interested in, especially interested in the initial payment fiasco. And the lack of correct actuarial support for initial payments is it's a fundamental problem. We recently met with one of the senators in New Jersey, and we're trying to get a law passed, actually. There's a law proposed, a bill has been proposed requiring that all initial payments that are to be paid back be paid in a year. That's going nowhere. Leading age fights it. So, in fact, it's being fought by all the providers. But then we are trying to work more along the lines of the Erickson model. Erickson has a model in our state that has those, has a process for reliably paying back. So that's, but that looks like it's gonna work there. Meanwhile, we're trying to go to this senator, and we ask for support for a bill that is more like the Erickson model, which actually works. He said, well, I don't think that we should, he was not interested in supporting us for a very simple reason. He said, if we require that people be paid back their initial payment, usually it goes to heirs. And I don't want to support the people who, you know, they're just heirs of residents, that it doesn't help the residents. So why would we take money away from the residents and pay back the heirs? Our position is more, it's unfair to have a setup that is just not followed. You sign contracts and then the people don't have the money to pay back the initial payment. And that's happening.
Who's the actuary who's involved with your group?
We don't have an actuarian in our Orange organization. I've been thinking of trying to get my son-in-law, who's an actuarian, but he's a young man.
Okay,
Well, I'd like to take Dan, go back to Dan Seeger's point. We need a national organization of residents. People ask, what's in it for me? And the answer is, we advocate for you. And then you say, what do we advocate for you? Where is the fire in the belly for the people in New Jersey or North Carolina that say, by God, whether we have a state organization or not, I want to be a part of NaCCRA because they are working for me in Washington, D.C. to get Medicare fixed so I won't get victimized by a 3-day rule. Or as Charlie Paulk got us together and said, we don't want to be victimized by an IRS that taxes our entry fee as deferred interest. And we got some fire in the belly, and we have an advocate-oriented agenda. Here's the benefit, and damn it, you cannot afford not to pay $20 to work for your own benefit.
Bob, are we an organization in search of an agenda?
With the what?
Are we an organization in search of an agenda? You just said, here's why we should join the 3-day rule. AARP's taking care of that. So I'm
saying such as those two examples, but it's got to be clearly focused on it.
But again, it becomes subtle, because I was listening to what Ron was saying, and Ron's not, and an entry fee contract is very similar to a life annuity contract. I think you would agree with it. And I'm sure you don't know how life annuities are regulated. And the regulation of life annuities is identical in every single state in the United States and the 5 territories and the District of Columbia. They all have uniform laws. And do you know how that comes about? So without that knowledge, which is what you need essential to have an effective national advocacy program, without even knowing how to do it, people go to where Bob just went and said, gosh, the great parent in Washington, D.C. ought to do it for us.
Yeah.
Let's get them to do it. And I just don't think that's going to work well.
Yeah, I think it will. I think that the whole model laws concept is something that really needs to be promoted again and again until people understand it. It takes a while for people to understand what's going on with model laws. But that is what we really should be focusing on. And I'd like to go back to New Jersey and ask if you have individual memberships costing how much?
No, we have no individual memberships.
Yeah.
We have almost no money, actually. Our budget, the entire budget, is approximately $4,000 a year, $4,000.
But you can do that in a small state where you can drive everywhere. I live in California.
Our number of NaCCRA's of 25 is pretty good.
Well, I don't mean to be small that way. I live in California.
We have people in New Jersey.
I live in California. It's 500 miles for me to drive to Sacramento. in Texas, to go from Dallas out to west of Texas where there are a lot of CCRCs is a very long drive. In Alaska, it's a very big state. So in New Jersey, you can expect elderly volunteers to get in their cars and drive to a central meeting.
I haven't said that's easy. It's getting extremely hard to get volunteers. And that's part of the dynamics working here.
I want to ask about the organization. So you don't have individual memberships, you have memberships of CCRCs in New Jersey?
We're a group, in fact, it's our title, Organization of Residents Associations in New Jersey.
Excuse me, a minute, we're getting off the subject a little bit here. Can I get us back? I want to make a couple of comments for you. One is that we looked, actually Charlie Pop looked at the issue of how can we get advocacy in Washington, D.C. Turns out his estimate was that it would cost between $50,000 and $100,000 a year minimum for an advocate to work the halls of Washington, D.C. for us. We don't have that kind of money right now, and so we can't do that. We would need to grow our membership at least 5-fold, perhaps, and 10-fold in order to get that kind of income.
First of all, before you have somebody advocating in Washington, D.C., the members need to know what's going on. The first thing you do is educate your members, and we haven't done that quite yet.
Well, the
Not with the
article I
Bible
wrote to discuss this for the Lifeline. But I want to get back to something that Jack mentioned when he was going through his discussion. He asked the question, is there another way besides the committee structure for NaCCRA to organize itself and conduct its business? And I want to explore that question. Is there another way besides committee structure? Yeah, Basil.
Well, one of the things that I've listened to a lot of history, and I realize I don't have the history that most of you have, but one of the things that I was going to bring and discuss today was organizing around states versus organizing around providers. I live in a multi-site. LifeSpace Communities has 12 locations. And they also have a central board. And when we talk about your model legislation, it requires or suggests that we put residents on the board. The argument is always, well, we got 12 units, how are we going to do that? We don't want the board to grow that much. But the point is, advocacy to me is just not advocacy at the federal government level. A lot of the issues are to providers. And I wondered whether it's ever been considered that maybe the NaCCRA as a national organization could have subunits that circle around multi-state providers. For instance, the 12 people at the 12 communities that are part of LifeSpace. So that was one thing, because we kind of argue one-on-one. We've tried to pull those units together, but that's a mission that's yet to be addressed. I think also there are a number of things that I heard here about organization that are dysfunctional in what you have now. I live in a strong FLACRA organization. There's no question about it. FLACRA is active. We have about 95% of the place I live, about 95% of the people are part of it. They're given their first year membership. They're billed at the end of through the company at the end of the year. So everybody in effect is a FLACRA member. But there's some dysfunction between that state organization, some competitiveness with the national organization. What does NaCCRA bring to the table that FLACRA doesn't do? Well, I can name a lot of things, but I don't want to go into it here. So I think the deal for me is there a mission that could organize around perhaps providers or maybe subunits? I don't know what they might be called, but something that would provide advocacy for residents in a particular provider. And then the second issue, I won't repeat that for you. But anyhow, I think there are some places that we could
One of the things I had proposed a year or so ago was establishing of standards. And Dan took, I don't know if he took my suggestion or did it on his own, but he did a lot of work with residents' rights.
Yeah.
And we're just about at the point where we could publish a standard for residents' rights. That's one example,
Yeah.
that we could publish a standard and say, this is our standard, we recommend it to all the states.
But that was adopted by the NaCCRA board at its May 2015 meeting.
That's right. So in a sense, it is such a standard, unless you want to change it, unless you want to change it.
Well, I think some of the board who were involved in it have forgotten that they did that.
Right.
And we have, if I can go back to my point, we have used that with our provider. We've said, this is the NaCCRA resident rights.
And the process of drafting that did draw a lot of interest from the small membership that we have. You know, there were 2,000 people. Not all of them responded, but a lot of them participated in it.
We have like 83 communities who got communications for them.
Right.
In FLICRA, you have individual memberships that pay how much?
I think it's $30-some a year, I don't remember.
35 for a
They-
couple.
Right
I
now,
They
forget
deduct
the,
it from my bill.
yeah.
now, a pitch was made to people in Florida to become associate members. That is to pay one set of dues, which would pay membership dues in
Yeah.
NaCCRA and Florida. And they turned it down. Same pitch was made for people in North Carolina. They turned it down. So far, we have had nobody except Washington DC, which is going by the guidelines in the new proposed bylaws.
By Washington State. you mean. Did you mean Washington
Say
State?
Washington State.
Well, that was my second point. There is some, we don't need them. When the residents where I live look at, and the officials in FLICRA look at NaCCRA, they say, what do we need them for? I know, I don't, you don't have to sell me.
We need to think long and hard before we put in the new bylaws, because so far, it's not selling.
Yeah, it isn't, yes, it isn't.
So, Dan, go ahead.
Well, the thing about Washington is that not only is it very expensive, but although 600,000 people in the United States of America sounds like a lot of people to us, I think from a Washington perspective, it's a minuscule constituency. It'll be very hard to get any federal government to focus on 600,000 people, I think. But it seems to me that since it probably is logical to proceed state by state, this is more than ever an argument for the need of a national residents organization so that every state isn't reinventing the wheel on all these issues, like residents' rights or like model laws. And I think we can make a good argument for the very fact that Washington isn't interested in us, so to speak, is a good reason to have NaCCRA as a sharing. I know in the Pennsylvania organization, which I'm a member of, I know 1,000 ways where Parker, the Pennsylvania Alliance of Retirement Community Residents, could benefit from knowing what has happened in North Carolina. Just the very fact that Parker only involves 25, out of 91 CCRCs in Pennsylvania, only 25 that are within a traveling radius of the capital, Harrisburg, are involved. All the CCRCs out of Pittsburgh and all the CCRCs out of Philadelphia just aren't involved. So we have to learn from the way North Carolina is organized to get everyone involved. So there's many ways that the states could benefit from learning of each other's experience that I think NaCCRA can facilitate.
I think I support a lot of what you said. I'll give one example at the federal level. One of the main things that NaCCRA got, in fact, just about everything that NaCCRA got has been the work of individuals, not the organization. And I'm increasingly wondering whether working within the organization is a waste of time, and it's better to just work individually with a group of associates. But so that's another question. But the right to return home When managed care came in, if you go to the hospital and you're discharged to a skilled nursing facility, the managed care organizations send you to a place in their network where they have cost containment. So residents who lived in a CCRC with a skilled nursing facility were being sent to other places distant from their home CCRC when they bought into the continuum of care. So Milt Brummer was friendly with, is it Barbara Mikulski? And so he was in visiting with her and told her about this. She said, well, I'm going into a meeting of the Committee on Aging right now. Why don't you come in and tell them that? He went and told them that. They voted it. Went out, it was attached to a bill, and we got that.
In California.
Oh, nationally. That's a federal right to return home law. So you can get things by serendipity at an individual level. Now, when it comes to cooperating, the answer to the annuity regulation is that the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which is an organization of the insurance commissioners of the 50 states and the 5 territories, which was formed in 1871, has a long history, develops all of the insurance laws, which are uniform in every state. They're not debated state by state. They're developed centrally. They meet 3 times a year. At those meetings, they adopt regulations. It's a much more open process than Congress. The industry people are there and can talk on a technical level. It's much less the kind of jockeying for position and posturing that we've seen. And it's a more effective model of regulation than what we now have. North Carolina has very good disclosure laws. New York State has very good actuarial laws. California has an awesome Bill of Rights, which is not enforced. So, but there's no uniformity. So if somebody moves from one CCRC to another, they have no idea what they're getting into. In fact, when you move in, you probably imagine you think you know what you just signed, but you don't have a clue. That's my experience. That's got to change.
Speaking for Virginia, we would like to see NaCCRA continue in some format. Figuring out how to do that is the job that we're talking about today. However, I think the way to get started working with Leading Age is not with respect to Jack, a proposal that the providers are sure to not support all of the finance issues. However, I don't think our has the 3-day rule locked down. So that's an issue we can easily support, work together with Leading Age. I think it's better to start with them on baby steps and then move at the same time. We're working on all of the protection of our entry fees. And then when we have that in a format that's ready to go, we have that foundation of working positively with Leading Age already in place. And we're trying to do that in Virginia with Leading Age Virginia in baby steps. We've worked behind the scenes, and now we have a successful year, and we're moving on to year 2, and it's become much more interconnected.
I just point out that we're holding this meeting in conjunction with the Leading Age Conference, that we have always done that. We have worked with Leading Age from the very beginning.
Right.
We have always supported Leading Age in everything that they've done. Leading Age recently had a engaging consumers cabinet with one resident on it, and that resident was a retired provider. And so you've got to understand what you're dealing with here. And in an industry where roughly a third of the providers are operating with an impaired balance sheet, meaning that between a fourth and a third of the CCRCs in the nation have liabilities greater than their assets, even on the liberal GAAP accounting. That is a troubled industry that needs to have a financial focus. The reason why finances are sensitive for them is because they cannot meet the standard.
Could you say that last sentence again about liability?
Well, between a fourth and a third of CCRCs are operating in effect in bankruptcy. But they don't have a plan of rehabilitation. If residents had bankruptcy standing as investors, those would not be allowed to continue to operate that way because they'd be able to be called into involuntary bankruptcy.
So their liabilities exceed their known assets.
Pardon?
Their liabilities exceed their known assets.
Yeah, what they do is they use the entry fee cash to meet the bond covenants. Because the debt providers have seniority over residents. Residents are the bottom of the heap.
I can add a footnote to that. When the accounting standards changed, I think it was in 2014, the liability that was recorded for LifeSpace Communities, Inc. was in excess of $260 million. And to this day, the net asset position of my provider and my specific operating location is well in excess of, is a negative net asset position. And I think there are many like that.
Oh, yeah. And there's a funny aspect to this because the providers tend to look at occupancy as a metric. So Air Force Village West, which is a California provider, has relatively low occupancy. They overbill. So but they downsize the operation to fit that. So they're operating on a sound basis. They do have actuarial advice and they follow it. So it's financially perfectly sound, but the industry has put it on the troubled list, and the Department of Social Services, which oversees such communities in California, and which has no financial expertise, buys the industry. They're the experts, so they have Air Force Village West, which is financially sound, on the troubled community list. So it goes both ways. It's not an industry that's been open to scientific management principles. They run on this belief that the nonprofit difference is the intrinsic advantage. And that's an article of faith as opposed to scientific management principles. And that's a hard idea to get across to residents. That most residents throw up their hands at this point and say, I don't even hear any more about it.
We're talking about NaCCRA here, and I have here a copy of the letter that Jack Snyder sent out to everybody when he resigned from the board. And it says, frankly, I have felt ineffective and useless as a board member. The board has an executive committee that decides everything of importance. And he says, we lost Ohio, turned off Colorado, which I believe wanted to start a state organization. We lost Illinois, which is going on without NaCCRA, and we may have discouraged Florida, all because of a lack of business acumen on the part of the decision makers in NaCCRA who can't or won't make a decision or even acknowledge the problem that their indecision is causing. I have learned over the years that activity is not the same thing as accomplishment. In fact, doing the wrong things well will put you out of business faster than doing the right things poorly. Since execution is hard to accomplish at NaCCRA, we need to at least focus on the right things, even if we do them poorly. At least we will stay in business longer. Now I say he's on the right track. He understands what the problem is, and he's resigned because he felt useless and ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of us who feel useless and ineffective are sticking in there.
In a related issue, but we don't give much attention to, as you know, CCRCs come under criticism for only accommodating middle-upper income.
Yes.
Now, I know among the denominations that cooperate with HUD are the Episcopal Church, the Lutheran Church, and the Mennonites. How many of your retirement centers cooperate with HUD?
Ours does.
Very good. Well, as you know, the Housing Urban Development have a maximum income allowed in different states across the country. In DC, it's $49,000. In Harrisonburg, Virginia, at the Mennonite Center, it's $38,000. But they accommodate many who qualify and have a whole wing of the retirement center for HUD residents and integrate those residents into the life of the community. And I think it's time that we need to become advocates for HUD, reaching middle-lower income and not only middle-upper income.
But we are who we are. We're NACCRA, and we're made up of members who have substantial incomes.
Well, I think if we're going to,
CCRC near mine, called Givens Estates. It's actually managed, well, I shouldn't say managed, it is supported by the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church. They are growing leaps and bounds, but their growth is in low-income housing. They have put the low-income housing on separate campuses, and the rationale is that the services provided for the low-income housing are not as elaborate as those for their regular people. Now, they've also gone to Type C contracts, which is a pay-as-you-go type contract. And more CCRCs are doing that, which is essentially one way they can get around it. But clearly, at that CCRC, there's a distinction between the full, the people that pay full amount and the HUD people and the services that they provide to them. I don't know if that's true with the Mennonites, but I'm not sure that it should be, but it's an issue that is obviously prevalent throughout the industry.
well, there are many ways you can address it. I think if we're strictly an organization of rich people wanting somebody to enact legislation to support us rich people, and I heard one person complain, well, the wealthy are, their Social Security is taxed, we ought to advocate to have that lifted. I don't think we're going to get anywhere being an organization that strictly advocates for wealthy people. I think we've got to broaden our base of reach, but I don't get that there's any sentiment to do that. And whenever that's been raised, people say, well, it ought to be buying for CCRC residents. So one of the things that has totally handicapped us is a requirement that members, to be a full member of NaCCRA, you must be a CCRC resident. And that's an area where seniority doesn't work in your favor. Seniority goes the other way. So that's hurt us in getting the leadership that we need to be an effective organization. We tried to change that, and as you know, Washington State brought out its members to knock that down. So now, Dan, as I recall, Dan, you were, I should give the other side, but you favor that. In other words, we were thinking of getting somebody like Catherine Pearson, A.V. Pell, and Susan Weiss involved in NaCCRA. And you oppose that, right?
No. What I opposed was having providers on the board. I didn't oppose young people or academics. I thought it was a conflict of interest for providers to be on the NaCCRA board.
Okay, so it got distorted because what happened is the bylaws now say that you must be a CCRC resident.
That's the bylaws we inherited, all of us.
No, well, we didn't inherit. They were, you may have inherited because you, that was the revision that Ruth led. That was enacted. It was put into effect in February 2013 after a long series of meetings. One of the changes that was led by Judy Moss was to limit NaCCRA to just CCRC residents and not have a big tent NaCCRA.
Our bylaws say residents and others.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what, well, Ruth was trying to go, you should talk to that, Ruth, because you were trying to go to the big tent and Judy didn't go for it.
Yes.
And she managed to get a majority of one in the board.
Yeah, and that was very frustrating because the families and what have you certainly are interested in NaCCRA, in the things that happen in CCRCs, and if they buy into that as well, and our future residents as well. But it did not happen, and I'm still ready to.
So that was one of the changes that we tried to
wouldn't
go back
listen.
and fix this most recent time, killed again, so.
It's now 5 minutes after, 4 minutes after 11, and they need to set up for luncheon here, so I'm going to suggest that we take a break and meet again at 11:30 for lunch. I'd like to discuss two subjects during the lunch hour, and continue this, two special subjects. One is the subject that Jack brought up. What can NaCCRA do to organize itself better besides its committee structure, which it has used in the past? But it is inactive at the moment. The second is, I'd like to hear from the states a little more, and we've heard some already, about what they think NaCCRA should be doing for them.
Oh, and what they can do for NaCCRA, since
And
we are, see, one of the things that we've lost, we are a creation of the states to provide a national voice. And, turn to Florida, and they say, who are you? We are a child of your creation. And it's like, really? So I think we need to hear both. And I'd like to, over the break, have somebody draft a proposal forward that we move to a smaller board with an executive director and a few people that get it together and then build on that.
And then people
Send
who
out
are
a
willing to
bylaw
work.
change and get on.
Can't do it. Nobody wants to do it.
Bob, I'd like to introduce the Connecticut Vice President who is sitting
Oh my
back next
goodness,
to
right
you.
here?
Yes, Denny Davidoff, and she will be
May I
President
stand?
of Connecticut next May.
Oh.
Yes, very nice.
And she will have a hard act to follow.
Connecticut. Oh,
And
she
she
is
has
in,
no idea. Walking into this.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for your comments. I've been making notes. And Jack.
I tell you, while you're all seated, let me
What's that?
count how many are here.
I
I worked 18
can't hear
lunches. How
over
many
Bob.
people in the room? We may have to have the, what?
2 for me. My husband is coming.
I thought you were
Well,
hungry.
let's count. One, go ahead, count. Huh? Okay, then,
He's registered.
well, we do reserve any lunch, so we